The moment the palace went silent, everything changed. And not the kind of silence that protects secrets, but the kind that confirms them. Because behind those ancient walls, something far more explosive than a family disagreement was unfolding. A quiet transfer of power so precise, so calculated, it didn't need an announcement, it only needed one decision. And that decision has now drawn a line that may never be crossed again. It didn't begin with shouting, it didn't begin with a public clash, it began with a shift so subtle most people missed it. A step back, a pause, a withdrawal. And at the center of it all stood King Charles, not making noise, not making headlines, but making a move that insiders are now calling the most defining decision of his reign. Because instead of continuing to personally handle the growing storm surrounding Harry, he did something no one expected. He stepped aside, and in doing so, he handed over something far more dangerous than responsibility. He handed over control. Not partial control, not symbolic control. Full, quiet, unchallenged authority. And the moment that authority landed in William's hands, everything changed. Because William was never going to play this the way Charles did. Where Charles chose patience, William chose clarity. Where Charles tolerated gray areas, William erased them. And the first rule that emerged from that shift was as cold as it was final. There would be no more in between. No more half in, half out. No more blurred roles. And most importantly, no return without consequences. That's where the so-called no return rule begins to take shape. It wasn't written down, it wasn't announced. But inside palace circles, it became understood almost instantly. If you step away from the system, you don't just walk back in. Not when the stakes are this high. Not when the institution itself feels threatened. And certainly not when the person now holding power believes that every compromise weakens the crown. Because to William, this was never just about Harry. That's the part most people don't understand. This wasn't about brother versus brother. This was about system versus uncertainty. And from his perspective, the situation had become dangerously unstable. Harry and Meghan had stepped away, but not entirely. They still carried the titles, the influence, the global attention, and that middle ground, that undefined space, became the one thing William could not tolerate. Because in a monarchy built on structure, there is no room for confusion. And so, step by step, something began to change behind the scenes. Meetings became more direct. Language became sharper. Decisions became faster. The slow diplomacy that once defined palace strategy started disappearing, replaced by something far more controlled, far more decisive, and far less forgiving. And then came the moment insiders now describe as the handover without ceremony. No cameras, no statement, just a quiet understanding that William and a small inner circle would now handle everything related to Harry moving forward. Titles, appearances, access, even future positioning within the royal structure. All of it no longer Charles's burden. It was a move that changed the balance instantly, because once that authority shifted, the rules changed with it. And the first visible sign of that shift, the growing distance. Invitations that didn't come. Events that quietly excluded certain names. Spaces that were once shared, now carefully controlled. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It was precise, almost surgical. And that's what made it so powerful. Because exclusion doesn't always look like conflict. Sometimes it looks like silence, and behind that silence, a strategy was forming. What insiders have begun calling the steel wall, not a reaction, not an emotional decision, a system, a structure, a boundary designed to prevent any overlap, any confusion, any chance of the past repeating itself. Access points tightened, communication filtered, movement monitored, not as punishment, but as protection. Protection of the institution, protection of its future, protection of its image. And at the center of that wall stood William, unmoving. But here's where it gets even more intense, because this wasn't just about keeping Harry out, it was about redefining what being in actually means. Because for the first time in years, the monarchy wasn't just reacting to a crisis, it was reshaping itself because of it. A new rule was forming, unspoken but absolute. You are either fully committed or you are fully out. There is no return path that doesn't come with conditions, no re-entry without consequence, no presence without alignment. And for someone like Harry, who once stood at the very center of royal life, that reality hits harder than any public statement ever could. Because this isn't just distance anymore, this is separation with structure. And the deeper this strategy goes, the more permanent it starts to feel. Even moments that once hinted at reconciliation now feel different, because every potential meeting, every possible conversation carries a new risk. Not emotional risk, institutional risk. The risk of mixed signals, the risk of blurred boundaries, the risk of undoing everything that has now been carefully rebuilt. And so, the silence continues, not because nothing is happening, but because everything already has. And that's the part that makes this update so explosive, because there was no announcement, no confirmation, no dramatic confrontation, just a quiet shift of power, followed by a set of actions that speak louder than any words ever could. William didn't need to declare the no-return rule. He just needed to start living by it. And now the entire monarchy is adjusting around it. And what makes this even more unsettling is that once a system like this locks into place, it doesn't just affect one person. It begins to reshape everything around it, quietly rewriting what loyalty means, what belonging means, and most dangerously, what forgiveness is allowed to look like inside a structure that was never built for second chances. Because as this so-called no-return rule settles deeper into the palace mindset, something else begins to surface, something far more revealing than any headline. The realization that this was never meant to be temporary. This wasn't a cooling off period. This wasn't a pause. This was a reset, a recalibration of power, authority, and identity that shifts the monarchy away from emotional ties and straight into controlled, disciplined survival. And once you see it from that angle, the entire situation starts to feel less like a feud and more like a strategic elimination of uncertainty. Because uncertainty in William's world is the real threat, not criticism, not headlines, not even controversy, but unpredictability. The kind that turns private matters into global narratives overnight. The kind that blurs the line between duty and personal gain. The kind that makes the monarchy look divided instead of unified. And that's exactly what he has been trying to erase. Completely. Because here's the part no one says out loud. The moment Charles stepped back, he didn't just remove himself from the conflict, he removed the last layer of hesitation that had been slowing everything down. Charles, for all his patience, still carried that instinct to reconcile, to soften, to leave doors slightly open. But William doesn't leave doors open. He defines them. He decides who walks through them and who never does again. And that difference, that single shift in mindset, is what turned a complicated family situation into something far more final. Because once authority moved into William's hands, the question was no longer, can this be fixed? It became, should this even be allowed to continue? And from everything unfolding behind palace walls, the answer seems to be forming with brutal clarity. No, not like before, not under the old rules, not without a complete surrender to the system that was once stepped away from. And this is where the emotional weight of it all starts to hit. Because for Harry, this isn't just about access or appearances, this is about identity, about a role that was once automatic now becoming conditional, about a connection that once defined him now being slowly reclassified as external. And the more the palace reinforces that separation, the more it begins to feel irreversible. But even deeper than that, there's another layer to this story that's starting to emerge, and it's far more unsettling than any ban or exclusion, because insiders are now whispering that this no-return rule isn't just about Harry. It's about setting a precedent, a message to anyone now or in the future who might consider stepping outside the structure while still expecting to benefit from it. It's a warning wrapped in silence, a line drawn so clearly that it doesn't need to be explained. Step away and the system moves on without you. And once it does, it doesn't look back. That's why every move since this hidden authority shift has felt so controlled, so intentional, so irreversible. The exclusion from key moments, the tightening of access, the careful distancing from shared spaces. None of it is accidental. None of it is temporary. It's all part of a larger design, a design that replaces emotional flexibility with structural certainty. And standing quietly within that design, supporting it, reinforcing it, stabilizing it, is Catherine. Because while the spotlight often focuses on the tension between the brothers, what's happening behind the scenes is far more unified than it appears. This is not a one-person decision. This is alignment, a shared belief that the future of the monarchy depends on consistency, discipline, and above all, control. Control of the narrative, control of the roles, control of who represents the crown and who does not. And once that level of alignment is locked in, it becomes almost impossible to reverse. Because any step backward would not just reopen old wounds, it would undermine the entire structure that has now been carefully rebuilt. Every decision, every boundary, every silent adjustment has been made with one goal in mind: to eliminate the gray areas that once caused so much instability. Because gray areas are where problems grow, and William has made it very clear there will be no more gray. Only clear lines, clear roles, clear consequences. And that's what makes this moment so defining, not just for the relationship between William and Harry, but for the monarchy itself. Because what we are witnessing isn't just distance, it's transformation. A shift from a system that once tried to balance tradition with flexibility into one that now prioritizes clarity above all else. And clarity comes at a cost. The cost of softness, the cost of compromise, the cost of leaving certain doors permanently closed. And as this new structure continues to solidify, one question lingers in the background, not loudly, not dramatically, but persistently. What happens if the person outside wants to come back in? Because under this new rule, wanting is no longer enough. Returning would mean accepting conditions that didn't exist before. Conditions shaped not by emotion, but by strategy, by a system that has already adapted to your absence, by a leadership that has already moved forward without you. And that may be the most powerful shift of all, because the monarchy is no longer reacting to Harry's decisions. It has already made its own, and it's standing by them, silently, firmly, completely.